The whistle cut through the morning air at Fort Bragg like a blade, sharp, metallic, final. Atlas stood motionless in the center of the training yard, a jet-black German shepherd with amber eyes that burned with something between defiance and despair. 60 feet away, Sergeant Derek Harper's face had gone crimson, veins bulging at his temples as he gripped the training lead so hard his knuckles whitened. "Attack! Attack!" Nothing. The dog didn't even twitch. This was the 7th time that morning, the 7th failure in a drill so basic that puppies mastered it within weeks. Around the perimeter of the yard, 15 people watched in various states of frustration, embarrassment, and resignation. Trainers leaned against fence posts with crossed arms. Trainees shifted their weight, uncomfortable witnesses to what felt like a public execution. Civilian contractors tapped notes into tablets with tight-lipped efficiency. Harper threw his cap onto the dirt, the gesture violent enough to send dust spiraling upward. "Useless! 6 weeks! 6 weeks I've worked with this animal!" Lieutenant Amber Sterling stepped forward from the observation group. Her blonde hair pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She held a clipboard like a shield, or perhaps a weapon. "That's enough, Sergeant Harper." Her voice carried the particular ice that came from someone who had learned authority from textbooks rather than trenches. "We've wasted sufficient resources on this project. The recommendation is clear." She made a notation, the pen scratch audible in the sudden silence. "Atlas will be removed from the military working dog program, effective immediately." Sergeant Ryan Foster, standing near the equipment shed, shook his head slightly. He was a bear of a man in his late 30s, with kind eyes that had seen too much. He'd worked with war dogs for 15 years before a training accident had sidelined him to administrative duties. He knew what removal meant, not adoption, not retirement, not for a dog flagged as aggressive. "Ma'am, with respect," Foster began. "Your respect is noted, Sergeant Foster, but this decision isn't yours to make." Sterling turned toward the command building, already moving on to her next task, her next evaluation, her next judgment. "Wait!" Captain Carter Reynolds emerged from the doorway of the tactical training facility, his uniform crisp despite the North Carolina heat building, even at 0700 hours. He was 45, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of steady gaze that came for 2 decades of making decisions that affected lives. Good decisions, bad decisions, decisions that kept him awake at night. He'd been watching from inside, watching Atlas, watching Harper, watching the dynamic that felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. "One more chance," Reynolds said. His tone left no room for negotiation despite the phrasing. "Corporal Coleman." The name meant nothing to most people present. A few glanced around, searching for the owner. From the back of the observation group, almost hidden behind the taller forms of male personnel, a small figure stepped forward. Ivy Coleman was 5'2" in boots, with a frame so slight that her uniform seemed to hang rather than fit. Her dark hair was pulled into a regulation bun so tight it looked painful. She moved with careful precision, each step measured, as though she were navigating a minefield rather than crossing 20 feet of open ground. Her eyes, dark, watchful, remained fixed on a point somewhere around Reynolds' shoulder rather than meeting his gaze directly. She'd been assigned to the canine unit a week ago, transferred from logistics. A paper pusher, everyone assumed. Someone who had requested the transfer because she liked dogs, probably owned a golden retriever back home, thought military working dogs would be cute. Harper's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Sir, you're joking. She's never even handled a combat dog." "Then she has nothing to unlearn," Reynolds replied. His eyes moved to Coleman, who had stopped 3 paces away and stood at something almost like attention. Not quite parade rest, not quite casual. Something in between that spoke to someone uncertain of their place. "Corporal, your file indicates previous animal handling experience." It wasn't a question, but Coleman answered anyway. "Yes, sir." Her voice was quiet, not hesitant, just low, as though she'd learned that speaking softly meant people paid less attention, or perhaps paid the wrong kind of attention. Then approached the dog. Sterling's objection was immediate. "Captain, this is highly irregular. Corporal Coleman hasn't completed the handler certification course. She has no tactical training documentation. She's not qualified to..." "She's qualified to try." Reynolds' voice carried finality. "Unless you'd prefer I call SOCOM and explain why we're euthanizing a dog that cost the taxpayers $200,000 to train without exhausting every option." Sterling's mouth thinned, but she stepped back. Made another note. This one probably spelled trouble for Reynolds later. He'd deal with it then. Coleman walked toward Atlas with movements that seemed almost glacial in their deliberateness. Not hesitation, calculation. Like someone who understood that speed could be mistaken for aggression, that uncertainty could trigger instinct, that every gesture carried weight. 15 feet away, she stopped. Harper started to speak, probably to bark instructions about commands and posture and proper protocol. Reynolds raised a hand, cutting him off. Something in Coleman's stillness suggested she knew exactly what she was doing, or perhaps knew exactly what she shouldn't do. The morning sun climbed higher, throwing long shadows across the training yard. A mockingbird called from somewhere beyond the fence line. The sound of vehicles rumbled distant from the main base. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Coleman stood perfectly still, didn't speak, didn't gesture. Just looked at Atlas with an expression that was impossible to read from a distance. And Atlas, who'd been rigid with defensive aggression moments before, began to tremble. Not from fear, not quite. It was something else. Something that made Foster lean forward unconsciously, his professional interest suddenly sharp and focused. The dog's tail, which had been stiff and high, lowered inch by slow inch. His ears swiveled forward, then back, then forward again. Uncertainty, confusion, recognition. "Holy cow," someone whispered. Harper took a step forward, aggressive in his posture. "Coleman, if you can't—" "Sergeant," Reynolds' voice carried warning. "Let her work." The standoff continued for another 30 seconds, 40, a full minute. People shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't how dog training worked. You gave commands, you enforced commands. You didn't just stand there, but Coleman did. And Atlas's trembling increased, his whole body beginning to shake like he'd been dropped into ice water. His amber eyes never left Coleman's face. Then Harper's patience, never his strongest attribute, snapped entirely. "This is nonsense. Corporal Coleman, either demonstrate proper command protocol or step away from the animal." "Show us what you can do," Sterling added, her voice sharp with the particular satisfaction of someone watching a failure they'd predicted. "Or admit this was a waste of everyone's time." Coleman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the first real emotion anyone had seen from her. She closed the remaining distance to Atlas in 3 smooth steps, then dropped to one knee beside the dog. Her hand moved slowly, steadily, toward his massive head. Atlas could have taken that hand off at the wrist. 60 pounds of jaw pressure, teeth designed by evolution for exactly that purpose. Every person watching held their breath. Coleman's fingers brushed Atlas's muzzle. The dog flinched but didn't snap. She leaned closer, her mouth near his ear, and spoke a single word so softly that even Harper, 5 feet away, couldn't make it out. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. Atlas surged to his feet, but the aggression had vanished like smoke. He pressed against Coleman's side in a perfect tactical heel, weight balanced, attention focused. His tail maintained a neutral position, his ears forward and alert. Every line of his body screamed military precision. The yard went silent except for the mockingbird's continued oblivious song. "What?" Sterling's clipboard slipped, nearly falling. She caught it awkwardly. "What did you say to him?" Coleman stood slowly, Atlas moving with her in perfect synchronization. "Just consistency, ma'am. Dogs respond to consistency." It was a nothing answer, an everyone answer, the kind of thing you'd read in a basic training manual, but something in Coleman's delivery made it sound like a door closing on further questions. Harper wasn't ready to let it go. "That's not protocol. You didn't use the proper commands. You didn't establish dominance. She got results," Foster interjected. His eyes were bright with something that might have been hope or might have been speculation. 6 weeks, Sergeant Harper. You had 6 weeks. She had 90 seconds. "Luck," Fletcher Webb spoke up for the first time. He was a civilian contractor in his 40s, hired for his expertise in canine behavior assessment. His company charged the military obscene amounts to evaluate problem dogs and recommend solutions. He'd recommended Atlas's removal twice already. Random bonding moment, put her through an actual drill and then test her, Reynolds said. His gut told him something significant had just happened, but his mind needed evidence. He needed to see this again, needed to understand what variables had changed. "Coleman, take Atlas through the basic obstacle course." "Sir, she doesn't know," Harper began. "Then brief her, Sergeant, quickly." Harper's briefing was perfunctory, and dismissive, delivered in the tone of someone explaining quantum physics to a child. The obstacle course consisted of 8 stations: tunnel crawl, jump wall, balance beam, tire sequence, A-frame climb, weave poles, platform scramble, and explosive detection dummy. Standard certification course. Dogs usually needed weeks to master it. Most never achieved perfect scores. Coleman listened without interrupting, without asking questions, without doing anything that might suggest competence or confidence. When Harper finished, she simply nodded once and walked Atlas to the starting line. But before we see what happens next, I need to tell you something important. This story isn't just about a dog and a handler. It's about the invisible warriors who serve in silence, the bonds forged in fire that most people will never understand, and the moment when truth shatters every assumption. If you believe that real strength doesn't need to announce itself, that the quietest people in the room might have survived the loudest battles, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to witness will change how you see everyone around you. The revelation coming in 15 minutes will leave you speechless. Coleman raised her right hand in a gesture that wasn't quite a signal, wasn't quite a command, more like a conversation without words. Atlas's attention locked onto her with laser focus. She pointed at the tunnel entrance. Atlas launched forward, low and fast, disappearing into the concrete cylinder and emerging from the opposite end in under 4 seconds. Elite time. Professional time. Coleman's left hand moved in a small circle. Atlas hit the jump wall without breaking stride, clearing 6 feet like gravity had taken a coffee break. Landed smooth, already turning for the balance beam. Around the perimeter, muttering started. Phones came out. Private Connor James, a fresh-faced 22-year-old in his second week of handler training, fumbled for his phone to start recording. This was either going to be spectacular success or catastrophic failure, and either way, he wanted evidence. Atlas navigated the balance beam like he'd been born on it. 12 feet of 4-inch wide wood, elevated 3 feet off the ground. Dogs typically needed guidance, encouragement, correction. Atlas moved like he was running on solid ground. The tire sequence came next. 5 tires suspended at varying heights, requiring the dog to jump through each in sequence without touching rubber. Precision work. Timing work. Atlas flowed through them like water, like choreography, like something that had been practiced 1,000 times. But Coleman hadn't practiced. She'd been here a week, in logistics. Harper's face had gone from red to white. Sterling had stopped at taking notes, clipboard held forgotten at her side. Webb pushed forward through the small crowd, his professional skepticism warring with undeniable evidence. Atlas hit the A-frame climb, 8 feet of steep incline and decline, with the same smooth efficiency. The weave poles required 12 alternating turns through narrow gaps. Dogs got confused here, got tangled, lost rhythm. Atlas executed it flawlessly. The platform scramble involved 3 irregular platforms at different heights, requiring calculated jumps and landings. Balance, core strength, trust that the handler wouldn't point you somewhere unsafe. Atlas sailed through it, which left only the final station, the explosive detection dummy. Sterling found her voice. "Stop the exercise. This is clearly rehearsed. Coleman's been training Atlas in secret, undermining Sergeant Harper's authority, and—" "With respect, ma'am," Foster interrupted, his voice careful but firm. "Corporal Coleman arrived on base 7 days ago. Atlas has been under constant supervision in the kennel facilities. There's been no opportunity for secret training sessions." He gestured at the dog, who stood waiting at the explosive detection station. "This is something else." "Then what?" Webb demanded. His professional pride was taking damage. 6 weeks of his assessments, his recommendations, his expert opinion, being contradicted by 90 seconds of a logistics clerk standing still and one word nobody could hear. "What's the variable we missed?" Reynolds didn't answer because he didn't know, but he recognized the shape of mystery when it appeared, and this one had edges sharp enough to cut. "Continue!" he ordered. The explosive detection station involved a replica of a street scene, overturned trash cans, abandoned vehicle parts, scattered debris. Hidden within the chaos were 3 training dummies designed to mimic explosive signatures. Standard protocol required the dog to locate each dummy, sit beside it without touching, and wait for handler confirmation. Most dogs found one, maybe 2 if they were having a good day. Perfect detection scores were rare enough to warrant documentation. Coleman gestured at the debris field. Atlas moved into it with his nose working, body language shifting from athletic precision to something different, something focused and methodical. He covered the area in a search pattern that looked less like training and more like experience. Real experience. First dummy, located in under 15 seconds. Atlas sat, statue still, 3 inches from the device. Textbook, perfect. Second dummy, hidden inside a hubcap, requiring both scent discrimination and physical dexterity to indicate. Atlas nosed the hubcap aside, sat, waited. Third dummy, the difficulty spike, placed under debris in a location requiring the dog to trust scent over sight. Many dogs gave up here, lost confidence, deferred to the handler for guidance. Atlas found it in 40 seconds. Sat, turned his head to look at Coleman with an expression that clearly communicated, "Are we done now?" The silence that followed felt different from the earlier stillness. This carried weight, substance, the kind of quiet that preceded earthquakes or verdicts or admissions that everything you'd believed was wrong. Foster broke it by laughing, a single sharp bark of sound that startled 2 trainees. Holy cow, that wasn't luck. That was precision. That was... He stopped himself, looking at Coleman with new eyes, speculative eyes. "Where did you train before logistics, Corporal?" "On the job, Sergeant," Coleman replied. Still that quiet voice, still that careful posture, but maybe, just maybe, a flicker of something else beneath the surface. Not pride, something harder, something earned. Reynolds stepped forward, his command presence radiating like heat. "Corporal Coleman, effective immediately. You're assigned to continue work with Atlas. Daily training regimen, full documentation. I want to see if this result is replicable." "Yes, sir." "Sergeant Harper, you'll supervise and provide technical oversight." Harper's expression suggested he had rather supervise a root canal, but he nodded sharply. "Yes, sir." "Lieutenant Sterling, adjust the training schedules accordingly." Sterling's notation on her clipboard looked angry, the pen pressure hard enough to tear paper. "Of course, Captain." Webb opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Captain Reynolds, with respect, I need to include this development in my assessment report. The behavioral inconsistencies suggest that we don't know everything about this dog," Reynolds finished. "Write your report, Mr. Webb. But remember that Atlas is no longer slated for removal. He's active status pending evaluation." As the group began to disperse, moving toward their next scheduled activities with the disturbed energy of people whose day had already deviated from plan, Foster approached Coleman. She'd knelt beside Atlas, running her hand along his spine with a familiarity that spoke to muscle memory rather than conscious thought. "That was impressive," Foster said, keeping his voice low and conversational. "Been around dogs much?" "Some," Coleman replied. Non-answer. Expert non-answer. "Atlas is special case. Flagged as aggressive for 6 weeks, failing every drill, responding to nobody, until you." Foster paused, watching her face for reaction. Got nothing. Makes a person curious about what changed. Coleman stood, Atlas rising with her in that same synchronized movement that looked rehearsed despite being impossible to rehearse. "Consistency, Sergeant, like I said." "Right. Consistency." Foster smiled, but his eyes remained sharp, watchful. "Well, if you need anything, equipment, advice, someone to talk to about training protocols, my door's open." "Thank you, Sergeant." She walked Atlas toward the kennel facilities, small and quiet and easy to overlook. Except Foster didn't overlook her now. Couldn't overlook the way Atlas moved with her, the precision in their coordination, the something that sat beneath the surface like pressure behind a dam. Foster had worked with enough war dogs to recognize the signs. He just didn't understand how someone from logistics could produce them. Not yet. But the following morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of weather that made bones ache and old injuries throb with remembered trauma. Coleman appeared at the training yard at 05:45, 15 minutes before the scheduled session. Atlas walked beside her in perfect heel, no lead required. Harper was already there, coffee in hand, his expression suggesting the liquid was the only thing keeping him vertical. He had spent the previous evening reviewing every piece of documentation on Atlas, training records, behavioral assessments, medical history, looking for the variable that explained yesterday's transformation. Found nothing except more questions. "You're early," Harper said, his tone making it sound like an accusation. "Yes, Sergeant," Coleman replied. No inflection, no emotion, just acknowledgement. Atlas stays in the kennel overnight, under supervision, no unauthorized access. Understood, Sergeant? So, explain to me how a dog that's been unmanageable for 6 weeks suddenly performs like a trained professional. Coleman looked at him directly for the first time, and Harper felt something shift in his gut. Her eyes weren't uncertain or deferential or nervous. They were flat, assessing. The eyes of someone who would learn to read threat levels and calculate responses before most people finish their morning coffee. "I don't know, Sergeant," she said. "Sometimes dogs just need the right handler." It should have sounded arrogant, should have triggered Harper's already primed defensiveness. Instead, it landed like truth, simple and inescapable, and that somehow made it worse. Before Harper could formulate a response that wouldn't violate fraternization protocols or reveal how rattled he felt, Corporal Bradley Walker emerged from the equipment shed. Walker was Harper's protege, a term that suggested mentorship, but really meant agreement, loyalty, someone who laughed at the right jokes and supported the right opinions. "Morning, Sarge," Walker called. Then, noticing Coleman, "Oh, the miracle worker's here early. Guess one good run means you're special now, huh?" Coleman didn't respond, just stood there with Atlas, waiting. Walker approached with the swagger of someone who had never been truly challenged. "I set up the equipment for today's drill. Double-checked everything myself. Wouldn't want any accidents that could, compromise the results." The implications hung heavy enough to dent concrete. Harper should have shut it down, should have reminded Walker about professional conduct and chain of command. Instead, he sipped his coffee and watched Coleman's face for reaction. Got nothing. Again. By 0600, the full training contingent had assembled. Sterling with her clipboard and judgment, Webb with his tablets and skepticism, Reynolds with his coffee and careful observation, Foster with his curiosity and knowing looks. Private Connor, Embeams, and Private First Class Willow Hayes, the newest handler candidates, stood close together, whispering and glancing at Coleman like she'd grown a second head overnight. The equipment room held military-grade technology most civilians never see. Tactical communication devices with encrypted channels, night vision systems that turn darkness into daylight, ruggedized laptops built to survive combat zones. These weren't consumer products. They were tools designed for the world's most demanding environments, where failure meant lives lost. Advanced GIFs tracking systems that could pinpoint a location within inches, even in the densest terrain. Medical monitoring devices that could transmit vital signs in real time from the battlefield to command centers thousands of miles away. Technology that kept warriors connected and commanders informed. Sterling cleared her throat, commanding attention without effort. "Today's evaluation will test Atlas's reliability under varied conditions. Corporal Coleman, you'll guide Atlas through weapons familiarization, tactical response scenarios, and simulated combat stress situations. Sergeant Harper will demonstrate proper protocol before each exercise." Translation: prove yesterday wasn't a fluke while we document every potential failure point. The weapons familiarization station featured disassembled components from various firearms: M4 carbines, M9 pistols, M240 machine guns. The test required the dog to remain calm while weapons were assembled and test fired with blanks, demonstrating tolerance for combat noise and trust in the handler's protective capacity. Harper led his demonstration dog, Ranger, a German Shepherd who had successfully completed certification 3 months prior through the exercise. Ranger performed adequately, minimal flinching at gunfire, maintained position throughout, followed commands with reasonable precision. Textbook acceptable. "Your turn," Harper said to Coleman, his tone suggesting he expected catastrophic failure involving Atlas attacking someone or bolting in panic. Coleman approached the weapons station with Atlas. Webb had positioned cameras to capture every angle. Sterling's pen was already poised above her clipboard, probably pre-writing the failure report. The weapons specialist, Master Sergeant Paul Stone, a 30-year veteran with more deployment ribbons than most people had t-shirts, began assembling an M4 carbine. The metallic sounds of parts clicking into place echoed across the suddenly quiet yard. Atlas didn't flinch, didn't react. Sat perfectly still beside Coleman, with an alertness that suggested he was cataloging each sound, identifying each component, tracking each movement with professional assessment rather than nervous observation. Stone noticed. His hands slowed slightly, and he glanced at Coleman with raised eyebrows. She gave nothing back. Just stood there in her too large uniform, hand resting lightly on Atlas's shoulder. Stone completed the assembly, charged the weapon, and fired 3 blank rounds into the clearing barrel. The crack split the morning air like thunder. Ranger, still nearby with Harper, jumped slightly at the first shot. Normal reaction, acceptable reaction. Atlas's ears swiveled toward the sound, tracked it, then returned to neutral position. His body language never changed from alert readiness. No startle response, no stress indicators. Stone fired 3 more rounds, then 5 in rapid succession. The sustained noise would break most dogs' composure, send them seeking cover or their handler's protection. Atlas could have been carved from stone. "Holy cow," Stone muttered. He'd worked with military working dogs for 3 decades. He knew the difference between training and instinct, between competence and experience. This dog had heard these sounds before, many times before, in contexts where blanks weren't blanks and tactical wasn't training, but that was impossible. Atlas's file indicated standard domestic training at Lackland Air Force Base, transferred to Fort Bragg 6 months ago, no deployment history, no combat exposure. The file had to be accurate. Files were always accurate, except when they weren't. Sterling's pen hadn't moved. She was staring at Atlas with an expression that suggested her worldview was developing stress fractures. Proceed to tactical response scenarios. The tactical response station simulated building clearing operations, a mock structure with multiple rooms, corners, concealed threats. The handler would move through with the dog, commanding searches and responses. Standard military working dog, bread and butter. Harper demonstrated with Ranger again, moving through the structure with called commands. Search! Clear! Out! Ranger performed competently, locating hidden threat dummies, responding to directionals, maintaining working focus. When Coleman's turn came, she paused at the entrance to the mock structure. Atlas looked up at her, amber eyes holding something that might have been anticipation, might have been memory. Coleman raised her hand, not a standard command, but that same subtle gesture from yesterday, and stepped through the door. What followed made Webb actually stand up from his observation position, tablet forgotten. Coleman moved through the structure in near silence, and Atlas flowed around her like water, like shadow, like something that existed in perfect synchronization with her body language. No verbal commands, just hand signals so small they were almost subliminal. A finger pointed left, Atlas cleared left. A palm raised, Atlas halted. A fist closed, Atlas waited in defensive posture. They located all 6 threat dummies in under 3 minutes. Professional handlers with certified dogs took 5 minutes minimum. Coleman and Atlas looked like they'd been doing this for years rather than one day. As they exited the structure, Foster approached Reynolds. "Captain, permission to speak freely?" "Granted." That wasn't training, that was operational experience. I've seen SEAL teams move with their dogs with less coordination than what we just witnessed. Foster's voice carried conviction and confusion in equal measure. Coleman's file says logistics. Nothing about tactical training, nothing about canine handler certification. Where did she come from? Reynolds had been wondering the same thing. "I'll make inquiries." "Do it fast, sir, because either we've got the world's fastest learner in history, or there's information missing from that file. Important information." Across the yard, Sterling had cornered Coleman, her professional facade showing cracks around the edges. "Corporal, your performance raises questions. Your file indicates no tactical training, no canine handler experience, no combat exposure. Yet your coordination with Atlas suggests extensive operational background. I need an explanation." "Dogs respond to confidence, ma'am," Coleman replied. Same quiet voice, same careful posture, same complete non-answer. Atlas needed someone who believed he could perform, so I believed. "That's not—" Sterling stopped, visibly controlling her frustration. "This is irregular, highly irregular. I'm recommending a full background verification." "Of course, ma'am." Sterling stalked away, already pulling out her phone. Webb followed, muttering about statistical anomalies and impossible learning curves. Harper stood near the equipment shed, watching Coleman with an expression hovering between resentment and reluctant respect. Only Foster approached her again, his demeanor friendly but his eyes sharp. "You've got some people rattled, Corporal. Wasn't my intention, Sergeant." "No, I suspect it wasn't." Foster crouched down, extending his hand toward Atlas. The dog turned his head to look at Coleman, waiting for permission. "May I?" Coleman nodded once. Atlas allowed Foster to scratch behind his ears, though his body language remained reserved, professional, like a soldier tolerating a civilian's enthusiasm while on duty. "I worked with war dogs for 15 years, Foster said conversationally, deployed twice to Iraq, once to Afghanistan. Saw some incredible canine teams, operators who could read their dogs like books, dogs who'd take bullets for their handlers." He paused, scratching Atlas's neck. "This feels familiar, the way he moves with you, the way he waits for your approval before engaging with others, the way he's always between you and potential threats." Coleman said nothing, but something in her stillness intensified, became more deliberate. "Dogs like Atlas aren't standard," Foster continued. "They're selected for specific temperaments, trained for specific roles, specialized roles." Another pause, weighted with implication. "You know what I mean, Corporal?" "I'm sure you know better than me, Sergeant," Coleman replied. Deflection mastery, redirect through deference. Foster stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "Well, if you ever want to talk about training methods, deployment experiences, specialized programs, I'm here, no judgment. Just professional curiosity." He smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "And maybe respect for what you've both been through." He walked away before Coleman could respond, leaving her standing alone with Atlas in the morning sun that had finally burned away the gray clouds. Around them, the base continued its daily rhythm, vehicles rumbling, personnel calling to each other, the distant sound of weapons fire from the range. Atlas leaned slightly against Coleman's leg, and her hand dropped automatically to his head. Contact, reassurance, connection that went deeper than training, or commands, or anything that could be documented in a file. She knew people were watching, knew questions were building like pressure in a sealed container, knew that sooner or later the truth would fracture through whatever thin camouflage she'd constructed around her past. But not yet, not today. Today, she had Atlas, and he was working again, living again, being something other than broken. That was enough. That had to be enough, for now. "Are you still watching?" "Good, because the pieces are starting to connect, aren't they?" That strange word. Those reactions. The way Atlas responds to her touch. Subscribe now if you haven't yet, because the truth about Ivy Coleman is darker and more powerful than anyone on that training ground can imagine. Turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the moment everything explodes. The following week unfolded like a storm building on the horizon. Visible, inevitable, charged with energy that made the air taste metallic. Coleman and Atlas trained daily, and each session produced results that defied conventional understanding. Scent discrimination exercises that should take months to master, Atlas completed them in one attempt. Complex tactical scenarios requiring weeks of repetition, flawless execution from the first run. Stress inoculation drills designed to test a dog's breaking point. Atlas didn't break, didn't even bend. Harper stopped making excuses, started taking notes instead. Watching Coleman's hand signals, trying to decode the language she and Atlas shared. He copied her gestures, tried them with Ranger, got minimal results. Whatever Coleman possessed, it wasn't replicable through observation alone. Sterling's background verification request returned with more questions than answers. Coleman's file was clean, too clean. Standard issue assignments, adequate performance reviews, nothing remarkable. But the gaps were there if you knew to look for them. 3 months where her location couldn't be verified, training certifications that appeared without corresponding course enrollment, evaluations written by officers whose names didn't match any personnel database. Webb hired an independent canine behavioral specialist, Dr. Grace Mitchell, renowned in veterinary circles for her work with trauma-affected animals. She arrived on a Wednesday morning with sensors and software and 2 decades of expertise that had made her rich solving problems other people couldn't. Mitchell observed Atlas for 3 hours, watched him work, watched him rest, watched the microscopic interactions between dog and handler that revealed relationship dynamics invisible to casual observers. Her report landed on Reynolds' desk that afternoon like a grenade with the pin pulled. "Captain," Mitchell said, settling into the chair across from his desk with the careful deliberation of someone about to deliver bad news disguised as professional assessment, "I need to be direct. Atlas exhibits every marker of post-traumatic stress disorder in canines." Reynolds set down his pen. "PTSD? He's performing better than any dog we've had in this program." "Yes, with Corporal Coleman." Mitchell pulled up data on her tablet, turned it so Reynolds could see. These readings show elevated cortisol patterns consistent with chronic stress exposure, hypervigilance behaviors, startle responses that he's learned to suppress rather than resolve, and most significantly, selective bonding that borders on pathological dependency. Selective bonding? Atlas trusts exactly one human being, Mitchell explained. Corporal Coleman. Everyone else registers as potential threat or irrelevant presence. That's not training, that's trauma response. A survival mechanism developed in high-stress environments where trust meant life or death. Reynolds studied the data, his military mind already connecting implications. You're saying Atlas has seen combat. I'm saying Atlas has survived combat. There's a difference. Mitchell's expression was grave. Captain, I've worked with military working dogs for 20 years. I've seen dogs return from deployment with PTSD. They present specific behaviors: avoidance, aggression, dissociation. Atlas presents all of them, but he's learned to function through them. That level of behavioral control indicates either extensive therapeutic intervention or operational necessity. Operational necessity, Reynolds repeated, meaning he learned to work through his trauma because the alternative was death, his or someone else's. Mitchell paused. The question isn't what happened to this dog, Captain. The question is who trained him to survive it. Reynolds' gaze drifted to the window overlooking the training yard. Coleman was there, running Atlas through obstacles, small and quiet and unremarkable, except for the impossible results she generated. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Send your full report to my office. Classified distribution. After Mitchell left, Reynolds pulled Coleman's file again, spreading the documents across his desk, like puzzle pieces that refused to form a coherent picture. Something was wrong. Or perhaps something was right in ways that weren't supposed to exist within normal military documentation. He reached for his phone, dialed a number from memory rather than contacts, the kind of number that didn't appear on bills or records. Colonel Crawford, a gravelly voice answered after 3 rings. Mason, it's Carter Reynolds at Bragg. I need information. Carter, long time. The voice on the other end carried cautious warmth. Crawford was SOCOM, Special Operations Command, one of the liaison officers who connected conventional military with the shadowy world of classified programs and denied operations. What do you need? I need to know if the name Ivy Coleman means anything to you. The pause lasted 3 seconds too long. Why are you asking? Because I've got a logistics corporal who handles dogs like a professional operator and a military working dog with PTSD who performs like he's seen combat, and their files say neither of those things should be possible. Another pause. Longer this time. Carter, this conversation isn't happening. Understood. Ivy Coleman is a name I recognize. From classified context. Context I can't discuss over an unsecured line. Crawford's tone shifted, became harder. But I can tell you this. If that name is at your location, there are reasons. Good reasons. Reasons that protect people and programs that can't afford exposure. She's training a problem dog, that's all. Then let her train the dog. Don't ask questions. Don't dig into files. Don't create documentation that curious people might find. Crawford's voice carried finality. And Carter, if that dog is who I think he is, you keep them both safe. You keep them working, because what they represent is worth more than your career or my career or anyone's career. The line went dead. Reynolds sat in his office for 10 minutes after, staring at Coleman's file, Crawford's words echoing in his mind. Classified context. Programs that can't afford exposure. Dogs and handlers representing something worth protecting. He'd spent 20 years in the military. He knew the edges where official policy met operational reality, where rules bent around necessity, where things happened that would never appear in any official record. He was looking at one of those edges right now. The question was whether he pushed against it or respected it, whether he demanded truth or accepted mystery, whether he prioritized regulations or results. Reynolds gathered Coleman's file, every document, every page, walked to his personal safe, the one without network connectivity or digital access logs, and locked everything inside. Some questions were better left unasked. Some answers were dangerous for everyone involved. That night, Coleman sat in her quarters, a small room in the temporary personnel barracks that felt temporary even after 8 days. She had unpacked nothing except essentials. The rest of her belongings remained in a duffel under the bed, ready for rapid departure that might never come, but always felt imminent. Her laptop was open, screen casting blue light across her face. She wasn't checking email, wasn't browsing social media, wasn't doing any of the normal things normal soldiers did in their off hours. She was looking at a photograph, digital copy of a physical photo she'd carried for 6 years, through deployments and disasters and the long walk back from places that maps didn't accurately label. 6 people stood in desert tan, heat waves visible in the background. 7 dogs sat at attention, tongues out, eyes bright. Everyone was smiling. Even the dogs looked happy. Coleman's finger hovered over each face, and she whispered names like prayers. Anderson, KIA, April 2019. Martinez, KIA, June 20. Jackson, KIA, July 20. Foster, she stopped. Different Foster. This one had been 32, from Texas, who'd told jokes that weren't funny but made people laugh anyway. KIA, August 20. Brooks, KIA, August 20. She didn't name herself, didn't need to. The woman in the photo looked different, heavier, healthier, with eyes that hadn't yet learned to map every room for exits or calculate threat vectors in grocery store parking lots. The dogs were harder. Most had died with their handlers in the ambush. The Taliban hadn't understood about canine teams, hadn't known the bonds that made human and animal function as single unit, had killed both in most cases, either simultaneously or within minutes. Atlas had been found 3 days later, lying across Coleman's unconscious body, so dehydrated and exhausted that the rescue medics thought he was dead until they saw the shallow breathing. He'd guarded her for 72 hours without food or water, fighting off scavengers and defending a handler who couldn't defend herself. They'd survived together, recovered together, been separated by bureaucracy and medical necessity and protocols that said traumatized handlers needed time away from their trauma sources. 2 years of time, 2 years of Atlas failing every evaluation, refusing every handler, performing like an aggressive menace that needed euthanizing. 2 years of Coleman filing requests and applications and appeals to get reassigned to canine duty. And then someone at SOCOM had approved something, and suddenly she had logistics orders to Fort Bragg, and suddenly Atlas was at Fort Bragg, and suddenly they had a chance to see if survival meant just living or actually being alive again. So far, it meant something. Something that felt almost like hope. A knock at the door pulled Coleman from her thoughts. She closed the laptop, stood, moved to the door with the automatic caution of someone who'd learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. Specialist Chloe Anderson stood in the hallway. She was 30, with tired eyes and a posture that spoke to deployments in places that aged you faster than calendars indicated. Corporal Coleman, sorry to bother you. No bother, Specialist. What can I do for you? Anderson shifted her weight, uncomfortable. I've been watching you train, with Atlas, and She paused, choosing words carefully. I served in Kandahar. 20. I was with logistics support for task force operations. Another pause. I was there when they brought the survivors in from that ambush. The bad one. The one that killed most of a canine unit. Coleman's expression didn't change, but something in her stillness became absolute. I saw a woman and a dog come through medevac, Anderson continued. Both critical, both not expected to survive. The dog wouldn't let anyone near the woman. Nearly bit a doctor who tried to intubate her. She met Coleman's eyes directly. There were only 3 handlers who survived Task Force Canine. I'm looking at one of them right now, aren't I? The silence stretched like wire under tension. Specialist, Coleman said quietly, I think you might be remembering things that didn't happen. Stress does that. Deploys do that. Yeah, maybe. Anderson didn't sound convinced. But if I was remembering right, I'd want that person to know something. I'd want them to know that people like me, support personnel, the ones who weren't operators, who weren't special, we knew what you all did. We knew who protected us. We knew who went into places we'd have nightmares about. Her voice cracked slightly. And we knew when they didn't come back. She turned to leave, then stopped. Atlas is lucky to have you. You're both lucky to have each other. Anderson managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Whatever your file says, whoever you're supposed to be now, some of us recognize warriors when we see them. Just wanted you to know that. She walked away, leaving Coleman standing in the doorway with emotions flickering across her face too fast to catalog. Gratitude, pain, fear, relief. The complex cocktail of being seen when you've spent years trying to be invisible. Coleman closed the door, leaned against it, and allowed herself 30 seconds of weakness. 30 seconds where her hands trembled, and her breathing went unsteady, and the walls she'd built around the past developed cracks that let memory bleed through. Then she locked it down, pushed it back, rebuilt the walls because walls were survival, and survival was all that mattered. She returned to her laptop, looked at the photograph one more time. "We're getting there," she whispered to the faces that would never age beyond the moment the camera captured. "Atlas is working again. I'm working again. We're almost okay. Almost." The demonstration was scheduled for 0800 on Monday morning. Lieutenant Hazel Brooks had organized it, voice of reason in a facility increasingly divided between people who believed Coleman was legitimate and people who believed Coleman was a problem waiting to explode. Brooks was 35, practical, with the kind of calm competence that made chaos organize itself out of respect. She'd suggested the demo to Reynolds as a way to either validate Coleman's capabilities or expose them as anomalous flukes that couldn't withstand systematic evaluation. Reynolds had agreed because he needed data, needed something concrete to report when SOCOM inevitably followed up on Crawford's cryptic warnings, needed evidence that would satisfy Sterling's growing insistence on formal review. The demonstration would test Atlas against professional standards, explosive detection accuracy, tactical response time, stress tolerance, handler communication efficiency. 12 evaluators would score independently. Results would be databased, filed, made official, which meant no more shadows to hide in, no more mystery protecting them. Whatever Coleman and Atlas were, it would become documented reality that morning. Coleman arrived at 0730, Atlas at perfect heel. She wore her uniform with the same careful precision as always, hair regulation tight, posture neutral. If she felt nervous about the upcoming evaluation, nothing in her demeanor suggested it. Harper was already setting up equipment, his movements efficient, but his expression conflicted. The past 2 weeks had forced him to confront assumptions he'd held for his entire career. That strength was loud, that competence was visible, that authority came from rank and volume rather than quiet capability. Coleman had challenged every one of those assumptions simply by existing. "Coleman," Harper said, his tone less hostile than tired, "the evaluation's comprehensive. Every drill we run in certification condensed into 90 minutes. There's no room for error." "Understood, Sergeant. I'm not trying to sabotage you." The admission came hard, forced through pride that had taken damage. I need to understand what I'm looking at here, what you and that dog represent." Coleman met his eyes, and for the first time, her expression held something beyond careful neutrality, not sympathy, maybe understanding. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "people survive things that should kill them, and when they survive, they have two choices: stay broken or find purpose in the pieces." She looked at Atlas, who sat watching her with absolute attention. "We chose purpose." Before Harper could respond, Sterling arrived with her evaluation team: Webb, Mitchell, Foster, and 3 external assessors from other canine programs. They carried clipboards and tablets and the self-important air of people who believed their assessments mattered more than the thing being assessed. Brooks conducted the briefing with professional efficiency, outlining evaluation criteria and scoring methodology. Coleman listened without interrupting, without asking questions, without doing anything that might betray nerves or uncertainty. At 0800 exactly, the evaluation began. The first test was explosive detection in a complex environment, a mock village scene with multiple structures, vehicles, civilian dummy placements, and 6 IED signatures hidden throughout. Standard protocol allowed 30 minutes for full clearance. Coleman and Atlas completed it in 16 minutes with 100% accuracy. The second test was tactical pursuit. Track a scent trail through varied terrain, maintain pursuit through distractions and obstacles. Locate target dummy within time limit. Atlas located the target in 8 minutes. Professional handlers averaged 15. The third test was defensive protection. Simulate threat to handler, assess dog's response speed and control, measure ability to distinguish between legitimate threat and distraction. Atlas's response time was 0.8 seconds. His control was absolute. His threat assessment was flawless. By the fourth test, compound protection with multiple entry points and coordinated attack simulation, even the external assessors were exchanging looks that ranged from impressed to disturbed. This wasn't just training. This was operational experience translated into performance. This was muscle memory and bonded trust, and the kind of precision that came from stakes higher than certification scores. During the break at the halfway point, Webb approached Brooks with his tablet extended like evidence in a trial. "Lieutenant, these results are statistically impossible for a handler with Coleman's documented experience level. The performance metrics suggest minimum 5 years operational deployment. Her file indicates 0 combat exposure." Brooks studied the data, her practical mind sorting through implications. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Webb?" "I'm suggesting that either the dog is exceptional beyond normal parameters, the handler is exceptional beyond normal parameters, or, most likely, both are exceptional in ways that aren't reflected in their official documentation." Webb glanced at Coleman, who stood near the equipment shed with Atlas, both still and watchful. "I'm suggesting there's information missing. Important information." "Missing or protected?" Brooks asked quietly. Webb had no answer for that. The second half of the evaluation included stress tests designed to break a dog's composure, sustained gunfire simulation, explosive noise exposure, chaotic environments with multiple stimuli demanding attention simultaneously. Most dogs showed degradation under these conditions. Some broke entirely, requiring handlers to abort the exercise. Atlas performed like the chaos was Tuesday. By 09:30, the evaluation was complete. The assessors huddled together, comparing scores and notes with expressions that suggested mathematics was failing them. The numbers didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. Brooks compiled the results, ran the calculations twice to verify, then approached Reynolds with the tablet extended. "Captain, Atlas achieved a perfect score in every category. Perfect. That's never happened in the 15 years this program has maintained digital records." Reynolds studied the data, his face carefully neutral. "And Coleman's handler scores? Elite level across all metrics. Her communication efficiency rated higher than instructors with 2 decades of experience." Brooks paused. "Sir, whatever her file says, Coleman's capabilities indicate extensive specialized training, the kind that doesn't appear in conventional military occupational specialty tracks." "Noted, Lieutenant." Reynolds turned to address the assembled personnel. "Based on today's evaluation, Atlas is certified for active duty status, fully operational. Corporal Coleman is certified as primary handler, effective immediately." Sterling's objection was immediate. "Captain, this is irregular. Coleman hasn't completed the formal handler certification course. Protocol also requires that we recognize competence when we see it, Lieutenant." Reynolds' tone carried finality. "Coleman and Atlas have demonstrated operational readiness exceeding standard requirements. They're certified." Webb opened his mouth, probably to voice more statistical concerns, but closed it again at Reynolds' expression. Some decisions weren't open to debate. The evaluation team dispersed, leaving Coleman and Atlas standing in the morning sun that had burned away the early chill. Foster approached with a grin that carried both congratulation and confirmation of suspicions he'd harbored since day one. "Perfect score," Foster said. "Congratulations, Corporal." "Thank you, Sergeant." "You know what this means, right?" Foster's grin faded into something more serious. "No more flying under the radar, no more quiet corners. You and Atlas are official now. People will be watching, asking questions." "I know," Coleman replied. Her voice held something that might have been resignation or might have been acceptance. "Good." Foster extended his hand. Coleman shook it, her grip firm and brief. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here, both of you. This program needs people who actually understand what these dogs are capable of, what they've survived." He walked away, leaving Coleman alone with Atlas and the weight of visibility she'd been avoiding since the day she arrived. Across the yard, Harper stood watching them. After a moment, he approached with movements that carried none of his previous aggression or dismissiveness. "Coleman." He stopped 3 feet away, proper distance. "I owe you an apology, a real one." "Sergeant." "No, let me finish." Harper's jaw worked like the words were hard to produce. "I judged you based on your size, your file, your gender, everything except your actual capabilities. That was wrong, unprofessional, and I'm sorry." Coleman nodded once, acknowledgement without absolution. "I'd like to learn from you," Harper continued. "If you're willing to teach, not how to be you, I'll never be you, but how to see what you see in these dogs, how to understand what they need." It was the first moment of genuine humility Coleman had witnessed from Harper. The first crack in armor that had seemed impenetrable through attitude and volume. "Dogs respond to authenticity, Sergeant," she said. They can smell fear, aggression, uncertainty. They read us better than we read ourselves. She paused. Atlas didn't fail for 6 weeks. He refused, because he knew the people handling him weren't ready for what he could do. And you were ready. I was necessary. A subtle distinction that carried weight. Sometimes that's enough. Harper absorbed this, nodded slowly, and walked away with slightly less weight in his shoulders. The beginning of transformation. The start of understanding that strength came in forms he'd never learned to recognize. As the training yard emptied, Sterling approached Coleman one final time. Her clipboard was absent, her professional facade showing cracks around the edges. I don't understand you, Corporal Coleman. Everything about you is wrong. Your size, your demeanor, your file. You shouldn't be capable of what you just demonstrated. Sometimes capabilities develop in response to necessity, ma'am. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Sterling studied her, with frustration and grudging respect warring for dominance. There's more to your story. I know there is, and eventually I'll find it. Maybe, ma'am. But maybe some stories are better left unread. Coleman's voice held gentle finality. Sometimes, privacy protects more than it conceals. Sterling had no response to that. She turned and left, her heels clicking against pavement with staccato irritation. Alone finally, Coleman knelt beside Atlas and buried her fingers in his thick fur. The dog leaned into her touch, exhaling a breath that carried more relief than any animal should be able to express. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "We're official. We're real again." Atlas's tail moved once, twice. Agreement, confirmation. But Coleman's smile held shadows because she knew what official meant, what real meant. It meant questions coming from directions she couldn't anticipate. It meant attention she'd spent 2 years avoiding. It meant the past reaching forward with hands that wouldn't be denied. Military personnel understood risk, understood exposure, understood that sometimes survival required becoming visible even when visibility was dangerous. They'd survived worse than bureaucratic scrutiny. They'd survived Taliban ambushes and 72 hours in the desert and the long walk back from death's edge. They could survive this too. They had to. We're approaching the point of no return. In the next few minutes, a single moment will expose everything Ivy Coleman has kept hidden. A torn uniform, a revealed marking, an identity that will make hardened warriors freeze in recognition. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now. The payoff you've been waiting for is about to detonate like a flashbang in a dark room. Military personnel understood risk better than anyone. They knew the value of protection, of planning for futures that might never come. Specialized financial services existed for those who served. Investment portfolios designed around deployment cycles, insurance policies that covered combat-related injuries, estate planning for families left behind. Veterans often transitioned into high-stakes careers where comprehensive coverage wasn't optional. Disability protection that continued payments even when injuries ended careers. Life insurance policies structured to support spouses and children through decades. Financial advisors who specialized in military benefits, VA claims, and long-term security planning for those who had sacrificed everything. The call came at 0600 on Thursday morning, 3 days after the evaluation. Coleman was already awake. Sleep was something that happened in fragments, interrupted by dreams that felt more like memories, and memories that felt like ongoing operations, when her phone buzzed with a number she recognized. "Coleman," she answered on the second ring. "Corporal, this is Captain Reynolds. Report to my office at 0700. Bring Atlas." The line went dead before she could acknowledge. Coleman dressed with automatic precision, mind already running scenarios. Official summons usually meant one of 3 things: commendation, discipline, or reclassification. She'd received all 3 in her career. Learned to accept them with equal stoicism because emotion changed nothing when orders came from above. At 0700 exactly, she arrived at Reynolds' office. Atlas at perfect heel, both of them projecting professional calm, despite undercurrents of uncertainty that made her pulse quick and her palms damp. Reynolds' office was sparse, functional furniture, military-issue everything, the kind of space that suggested its occupant lived elsewhere and only worked here. But the walls held photographs, Reynolds with various units, various deployments, various ceremonies marking achievements that mattered enough to frame. And in one corner, nearly hidden behind the filing cabinet, a photo of Reynolds with a dog, both younger, both dusty, both wearing expressions that suggested they'd just survived something significant. "Sit, Corporal," Reynolds gestured to the chair across from his desk. Coleman sat. Atlas lay down beside her, head up, alert. Reynolds studied them both for a moment before speaking. "I've spent the past 3 days making inquiries about you. Called people, checked databases, followed trails that should have led somewhere, but mostly led nowhere." Coleman said nothing, waiting. "Your file is clean, almost suspiciously clean. No blemishes, no commendations, no anything that would make you memorable. You're documented as completely unremarkable." Reynolds leaned forward. "But the performance I witnessed on Monday was remarkable, exceptional, the kind of exceptional that doesn't develop in logistics supply chains." "Sir, I'm not asking you to confirm or deny anything, Corporal. I'm telling you what I've concluded." Reynolds' voice softened slightly. "You and Atlas represent something that isn't supposed to exist in official documentation, something protected, something that people with higher clearances than mine have decided needs protecting." Coleman's breathing remained steady, but Atlas shifted position slightly, pressing against her leg. Contact, reassurance. "I received a call from Colonel Mason Crawford at SOCOM," Reynolds continued. "He told me to stop asking questions, told me to let you train the dog without creating documentation trails, told me that what you represent matters more than regulations or protocols or my career concerns." "Sir, I don't..." "He also told me that you and Atlas survived something that killed most of your team, that you're both dealing with trauma that would break most people, that giving you this chance to work together again is the least the military owes you for services rendered in contexts he can't discuss." The words hit like incoming fire, accurate, unexpected, devastating, despite causing no visible damage. Coleman's hands tightened on the armrests, knuckles whitening. Atlas whined, a sound so quiet it was almost subliminal, and placed his head on her knee. Reynolds watched the interaction, his expression softening further. "I'm not going to ask for details you can't give. I'm not going to push for information that's classified beyond my access level. But I need you to understand something, Corporal Coleman. You're not alone here. You have support. You have people who recognize what you've sacrificed, even if they don't know the specifics." Coleman's voice, when she found it, was rough. "Why are you telling me this, sir?" "Because hiding is exhausting. Because sometimes warriors need to know they're among allies." Reynolds pulled a folder from his desk drawer, thin, official-looking. "This is your new duty assignment. Effective immediately, you're reassigned from logistics to canine operations. Full handler status. Atlas is your permanent partner. No questions asked. No justifications required." He slid the folder across the desk. Coleman took it with hands that wanted to tremble, but didn't because control was survival. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. Being official means being visible. You'll have oversight, evaluations, bureaucratic nonsense that can't be avoided." Reynolds paused. "But you'll also have legitimacy, protection through process, and maybe a chance to actually heal instead of just survive." Coleman nodded, throat too tight for words. "Dismissed, Corporal. Welcome to canine operations." She stood, Atlas rising with her, and saluted with precision that came from muscle memory and gratitude that came from somewhere deeper. Reynolds returned the salute with equal precision and something that looked like respect. As she reached the door, Reynolds spoke again. "Coleman, one more thing." She turned back. "Atlas failed for 6 weeks with every handler here, but he didn't fail with you. That tells me you're not just a good handler. You're his handler, the one he needs. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." "Yes, sir." She left, walking through base morning with official documentation that legitimized her presence and protected her position. But the protection felt fragile, like a cover that could be stripped away by the right question from the wrong person. Still, it was more than she'd had yesterday, more than she'd hoped for when she'd arrived 2 weeks ago with nothing but desperate determination to reunite with the partner who'd saved her life. They were together now, official, real. Whatever came next, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything since August 12th, 03:47 hours. Together, watchful, and refusing to break no matter how hard the pressure came down. The next 48 hours passed with deceptive calm. Coleman settled into her new official role with the same careful precision she applied to everything. Minimal disruption, maximum efficiency, zero attention drawn to the transition. She moved her few belongings from temporary quarters to the handler barracks, a space designed for people whose primary relationships were canine rather than human. Atlas adapted to kennel life with professional tolerance. He slept in the designated space, accepted basic care from veterinary staff, tolerated the proximity of other working dogs. But his eyes tracked Coleman constantly when she was visible, and his body language remained reserved, cooperative but not connected with everyone else. Private Connor, James began shadowing Coleman during training sessions, notebook always ready, questions carefully phrased to sound like academic curiosity rather than personal investigation. He was 22, earnest in the way of people who hadn't yet learned that some questions shouldn't be answered. "Corporal Coleman, how do you maintain such precise nonverbal communication with Atlas?" he asked on Friday morning, watching as Coleman guided Atlas through a complex search pattern, using only minute hand gestures. "Practice," Coleman replied. "Non-answer mastery." "But how much practice? Where did you train before coming here?" Coleman paused, considering how much truth was safe. "Field experience teaches faster than formal courses, Private. When circumstances demand performance, you learn or you fail. Atlas and I learned." James absorbed this, scribbling notes. "Field experience in logistics, field experience in survival." The answer shut down further inquiry, but James's expression suggested he was filing the information away, building a theory that would eventually connect disparate pieces into coherent picture. Willow Hayes approached with different energy, respectful distance rather than eager curiosity. She was 24, with the kind of quiet observation skills that suggested intelligence applied to assessment rather than assumption. "Corporal, may I ask something?" Hayes kept her voice low. "Private." "Go ahead, Private." "Atlas watches you like you're the only real thing in his world. Like everyone else is just scenery." Hayes paused. "I've seen that before. In dogs who've lost handlers. In dogs who've survived things that should have killed them." Coleman turned to face Hayes fully, evaluating threat level and determining intent. Found neither malice nor danger, just recognition. "You've worked with trauma dogs?" Coleman asked. "My family runs a service dog program. We rehabilitate military working dogs after retirement. Dogs with PTSD, physical injuries, behavioral issues from deployment stress." Hayes looked at Atlas with professional assessment. "Atlas has all the markers, but he's functional. That's rare. That requires either pharmaceutical management or—" "A reason to function," Coleman finished. "Exactly." Hayes met her eyes directly. "I won't pry, Corporal. Your story's your own. But if you ever need someone who understands what it takes to bring broken warriors back from the edge, canine or human, I'm here." She walked away before Coleman could respond, leaving an offer of understanding that felt more valuable than curiosity or judgment. By Monday afternoon, Harper had organized what he termed a comprehensive tactical assessment, language that meant combat simulation with variables designed to test Coleman and Atlas under maximum stress conditions. Sterling approved it immediately, seeing opportunity to either validate Coleman's legitimacy or expose weaknesses that would justify additional scrutiny. Webb supported it with enthusiastic documentation plans. Reynolds authorized it with the weary resignation of someone who knew conflict was inevitable and preferred controlled detonation to unpredictable explosion. The simulation was scheduled for Wednesday at 1400 hours. Force-on-force exercise with simunition, paint marking rounds that delivered impact without penetration. Coleman and Atlas would face a 4-person opposing force in a compound clearing scenario. Standard special operations training, the kind of exercise that separated competent handlers from elite operators. Harper briefed the scenario Tuesday morning, his tone professional, but his eyes carrying something that might have been concern. "The objective is simple: clear the compound, neutralize all threats, secure the objective. Opposing force will use standard ambush and defensive tactics. You'll have 15 minutes maximum." "Understood, Sergeant." "Coleman," Harper's voice lowered. "This isn't like the certification drills. This is combat simulation, real stress, real chaos. If you or Atlas aren't ready—" "We're ready, Sergeant." Harper studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but understand, once this starts, it doesn't stop until objective completion or safety abort. No do-overs, no excuses. I wouldn't ask for either." Wednesday arrived with weather that matched the tension. Overcast, humid, the kind of atmosphere that made sweat bead immediately and old injuries ache with phantom pain. The tactical training compound sat isolated from main base operations, a cluster of concrete structures designed to mimic Middle Eastern architecture, complete with narrow alleys, multiple entry points, and enough cover to make every corner potentially lethal. By 1345, the observation area filled with personnel: Reynolds, Sterling, Webb, Foster, Brooks, Mitchell, and a dozen others drawn by reputation and curiosity about the handler who'd produced impossible results with an impossible dog. Coleman arrived at 1355, Atlas at perfect heel. She wore full tactical gear, body armor, helmet, load-bearing vest that made her small frame look even smaller. But her movements carried efficiency that suggested the weight distributed properly, gear positioned for rapid access, nothing extraneous or decorative. Harper briefed the opposing force: Corporal Bradley Walker, Sergeant Paul Stone, Lieutenant Hazel Brooks, and Specialist Chloe Anderson, all experienced personnel, all trained in close-quarters combat, all instructed to treat this as real mission with real consequences. Opposing force will defend the compound using standard protocols, Harper announced. Simunition only, but hits count as kills. Handler or dog takes 3 hits. Exercise terminates. Clear? Everyone acknowledged understanding. Coleman checked Atlas's protective vest, ballistic fabric designed to stop shrapnel and reduce blunt force trauma. The dog stood patient while she adjusted straps and verified range of motion. Her hands moved with practiced familiarity, muscle memory from dozens of previous deployments where proper equipment meant survival. At exactly 1400 hours, the exercise began. Coleman approached the compound from the east, using available cover and moving with tactical awareness that looked natural as breathing. Atlas stayed close, reading her body language, adjusting position without verbal commands. The first contact came 30 seconds in. Walker opened fire from a second-story window, simunition rounds impacting near Coleman's position. She rolled left, Atlas moving with her, both seeking cover behind a concrete barrier. Coleman's hand moved in a quick gesture. Atlas broke from cover, sprinting low and fast toward the compound's south entrance, while Coleman provided suppressive fire from her position. Classic diversion tactic: split the enemy's attention. Walker shifted to track Atlas, and Coleman used the distraction to advance 15 feet to better cover. Another hand signal, and Atlas circled the compound perimeter, forcing the defenders to cover multiple angles. Sterling leaned toward Webb in the observation area. "That's not basic training, that's coordinated tactical movement." "I'm aware," Webb replied, his tablet recording every second. "The coordination requires either extensive joint training or operational experience." "Coleman's file indicates neither." "Then the file's wrong," Foster murmured. Inside the compound, Brooks radioed the defensive team. "Handlers moving west, dogs flanking south. Stone, cover the courtyard entrance." But Coleman had anticipated the communication, anticipated the response. She'd heard these patterns before, in places where anticipation meant survival and hesitation meant body bags. She moved to the compound's north wall, the one angle defenders typically deprioritized because approach was exposed. Atlas appeared from the south simultaneously, creating a pincer that forced the defensive team to divide coverage. Coleman breached the north entrance as Stone moved to intercept. She put 2 simunition rounds center mass before he could acquire target. Stone raised his hands, signaling elimination, and moved to observation position. 3 defenders remaining. Atlas slipped through the south entrance, low and silent, ghost-like in movement that suggested training beyond standard military working dog protocols. He located Anderson in a ground-floor room, barked once to signal presence, then retreated before she could engage. Coleman heard the bark, understood the intelligence it conveyed, adjusted her route accordingly. She cleared 2 rooms in quick succession, weapon up, movements fluid, every corner treated as potential threat. Walker attempted ambush from a stairwell, but Atlas detected him first, alerted Coleman with a soft growl that preceded the attack by critical seconds. Coleman dropped prone as Walker's rounds impacted where her chest had been, then returned fire that marked Walker's vest with 3 paint strikes. 2 defenders remaining, but the exercise had taken toll. Coleman's breathing was heavier, sweat soaking through her uniform despite the tactical vest's ventilation. Atlas's tongue was out, panting from exertion and stress. They'd been operating at maximum intensity for 6 minutes. Elite performance, unsustainable performance. Brooks and Anderson consolidated position in the compound's central courtyard, using interlocking fields of fire and limited access points to create killing zone. Coleman would need to cross 30 feet of exposure to reach the objective marker placed on a table in the courtyard's center. 30 feet, no cover. 2 experienced shooters with clear lines of sight, Harper muttered to Foster in the observation area. She's stuck, no way through without taking multiple hits. Foster didn't respond because he had seen the slight shift in Coleman's posture, the minute adjustment in Atlas's stance. Something was about to happen. Coleman moved to the courtyard entrance, weapon ready but not immediately aggressive. She made eye contact with Brooks, then Anderson, calculating ranges and reaction times and the margin between success and failure. Then she did something nobody anticipated. She dropped her weapon, raised her hands, walked into the courtyard. Brooks and Anderson immediately acquired targets, simunition weapons tracking Coleman's center mass. This was suicide. This was exercise failure. Atlas exploded from a side corridor nobody had been watching, moving faster than thought, hitting Anderson's position before she could pivot her weapon. He didn't bite, didn't need to in simulation, just body-checked her hard enough to send her off balance. Weapon pointed away from Coleman. Coleman used that split second to draw her sidearm, backup weapon Anderson had focused less attention on, and marked Brooks with 2 rounds before the lieutenant could shift aim from primary to secondary threat. Exercise complete. 7 minutes, 40 seconds. All objectives secured. The observation area erupted in conversation, exclamations, professional assessments delivered in tones ranging from impressed to disturbed. Harper stood frozen, replaying the final sequence in his mind. The weapon drop, the apparent surrender, the coordinated attack that used deception rather than force. That wasn't standard tactics. That was operational innovation born from real combat where rulebooks got people killed and survival required creativity. Coleman retrieved her primary weapon, checked Atlas for injury or stress, found neither. The dog was panting but alert, eyes bright with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. Brooks approached, paint-marked vest evidence of defeat, hand extended. Holy cow, Coleman. I don't even know what to call that. Adaptive tactics, ma'am, Coleman replied, shaking Brooks's hand briefly. That was special operations level, Brooks countered. Where did you learn to coordinate like that? Practice, ma'am? This? Trial and error. Error in logistics supply management? Brooks's tone carried curiosity rather than accusation, because that didn't look like error. That looked like someone who has done this under real fire. Before Coleman could respond, Walker approached with Stone and Anderson, all 3 wearing expressions combining frustration and respect. You made us look like amateurs, Walker said. But his tone lacked the earlier mockery, replaced by something resembling admiration. That final move, dropping your weapon, using yourself as bait, that's crazy. Brilliant, but crazy. Sometimes survival requires accepting risk, Corporal. Yeah, but you have to know the risk is calculated. You have to trust your partner completely. Walker crouched beside Atlas, who tolerated proximity but didn't engage. This dog would die for you. That level of bond doesn't happen in training. It happens in... He stopped himself, but the implication hung heavy between them. Combat. Real combat. Life and death combat where bonds forged in fire became unbreakable or broke completely. Sterling descended from the observation area, clipboard absent, professional facade showing significant structural damage. Corporal Coleman, I need you to explain the tactical decisions you just demonstrated. The coordination with Atlas, the adaptive techniques, the operational awareness, where did you acquire these capabilities? Through necessity, ma'am. Coleman's standard deflection, but it was wearing thin, repetition revealing edges rather than concealing them. That's not sufficient explanation. Your performance indicates that she's exactly what Atlas needed, Reynolds interrupted, arriving with Foster and Webb, which was the point of this exercise. Assessment complete. Coleman and Atlas demonstrate operational readiness exceeding requirements. Webb held up his tablet, data scrolling across the screen. Captain, the performance metrics are off charts. Reaction times, coordination accuracy, tactical innovation, these numbers match special operations benchmarks. Not conventional military working dog teams, special operations. Noted, Mr. Webb. But Captain, this raises questions about Coleman's actual background, her training history, the source of... The argument was interrupted by violent motion. One of the opposing force members, Stone, had been moving to exit the compound through a narrow corridor when structural stress from the exercise caused a section of corroded metal roofing to break free from its supports. 200 pounds of rusted steel dropped directly toward his position. Stone looked up, saw the hazard, started to move. Too slow, angle wrong, impact inevitable. Coleman reacted. Pure instinct. No thought, no calculation, just muscle memory, and training that transcended conscious decision-making. She crossed 15 feet in under 2 seconds, hit Stone with a tackle that sent both of them rolling clear of the impact zone. The metal roofing crashed down where Stone had been standing, hitting concrete with a sound like automotive collision. They came up tangled together, Coleman on top, Stone beneath, both covered in dust and breathing hard from adrenaline spike and near-miss awareness. Holy! Stone started to speak, then stopped because Coleman's jacket had torn along the left shoulder and upper arm, fabric ripping from the tackle's force and the rough concrete's abrasion. Exposed beneath, a tattoo, black ink, military working dog emblem, words that read Task Force Canine, Kandahar 20 in bold letters that couldn't be misread or misunderstood, and below the tattoo, scars. Distinctive scar pattern, shrapnel marks, the kind of injuries that came from IED blasts, from explosive force channeled through body armor, from surviving things that killed most people caught in the same radius. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Stone stared at the exposed skin, his expression transitioning from shock to recognition to something approaching awe. Coleman realized what he was seeing, tried to pull away, tried to cover the torn fabric. Too late, too slow, too visible. Around the compound, everyone close enough to see had frozen. Harper, Walker, Anderson, Brooks. Everyone processing information that rewrote every assumption they'd held about the small, quiet handler who'd appeared 2 weeks ago from logistics. Foster was first to break the silence, his voice carrying across the sudden stillness. "Oh my God! Task Force K9, Ghost Dog Program." Sterling took 3 steps forward, staring at Coleman like she'd transformed into something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in documented reality. Task Force K9 was classified. That program, it's not supposed to exist. It's not official, a new voice interrupted. Colonel Mason Crawford stepped out from behind the observation area, his presence commanding immediate attention, despite arriving without announcement or escort. He wore the kind of uniform that didn't need rank insignia to convey authority, with bearing that suggested decades of service in contexts that would never appear in official histories. "Colonel Crawford," Reynolds said, surprise evident despite professional control, "I wasn't informed you'd be attending this exercise." "Last-minute decision, Captain." Crawford's eyes moved to Coleman, still on the ground, still trying to manage the torn fabric that had exposed secrets meant to stay hidden. "Sergeant Coleman, you can stand down now. The exercise is over." Sergeant, not corporal, the rank correction landed like artillery fire. Coleman stood slowly, Atlas immediately at her side, pressing against her leg with protective pressure. She didn't attempt to cover the tattoo anymore, didn't try to explain or deflect or minimize. The truth was visible now. Denial was pointless. Crawford approached with deliberate steps, stopping 5 feet away. Close enough for conversation, far enough to respect boundaries. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to provide context that's been lacking." His voice carried command authority mixed with something heavier, something like respect. "Sergeant Ivy Coleman has never been, a logistics specialist. That assignment was cover status during medical recovery and psychological evaluation." Sterling's clipboard had returned, but she wasn't writing, just holding it like an anchor to reality that was fracturing. Cover status for what? For a K9 handler who served with classified special operations units. Specifically, Task Force K9, a joint program between conventional special forces and specialized canine operations designed for missions that required capabilities beyond standard military working dog protocols. Crawford's gaze swept the assembled personnel. The program was never officially acknowledged. The operations were never documented. The teams who served in it were never publicly recognized. Webb found his voice, though it came out strained. How many teams were in this program? 7 handler dog pairs, deployed to Afghanistan 2018 through 2019, working with SEAL team operations and classified raids in high-value target environments. Crawford's expression hardened. On August 12, 20, at 0347 hours, Task Force Canine was ambushed during an extraction operation in Kandahar province. Taliban fighters with advanced intelligence. Coordinated attack, complete tactical surprise. The silence now carried different weight, heavier, more painful. 5 handlers killed in action, Crawford continued, his voice steady but carrying undertones of anger and grief. 6 canine partners killed in action. 1 handler survived, Sergeant Ivy Coleman. 1 canine partner survived, Atlas. He gestured toward Coleman and the dog standing beside her. They were found 72 hours later, 3 miles from the ambush site. Atlas had guarded Coleman's unconscious body for 3 days without food or water, fighting off scavengers and defending a handler who couldn't defend herself. Around the compound, personnel reactions varied. Shock, recognition, understanding, respect, spreading like ripples from thrown stone. Connor James had tears running down his face. Willow Hayes covered her mouth with both hands. Harper's expression suggested his entire worldview was being forcibly reconstructed. Foster stepped forward, moving slowly, and did something that caught everyone by surprise. He stood at attention, saluted, full military bearing, perfect form, holding the position. Stone scrambled to his feet and followed Foster's lead, then Anderson, then Walker, despite his earlier mockery and doubt, Brooks, James, Hayes. One by one, every service member present came to attention and rendered salute to Coleman, not because regulation demanded it, but because recognition demanded it. Coleman stood frozen, torn jacket exposing the evidence of service and sacrifice. Atlas pressed against her leg, watching the humans perform their ritual with confusion that mirrored his handler's overwhelmed expression. Crawford let the moment hold. Let the respect be conveyed through gesture, since words felt inadequate. Then he returned the salute, releasing everyone else to do the same. Sergeant Coleman requested assignment to Fort Bragg because Atlas was here, Crawford explained. Transferred after her original deployment, flagged as aggressive and unmanageable, scheduled for removal. But he wasn't aggressive. He was traumatized. He was broken. He was waiting for the only handler he had ever trusted to come back for him. Sterling's professional composure had completely fractured. Why didn't you tell us? Why the cover story? Why let people think? Because warriors healing from trauma don't need spectators, Crawford said, his tone cutting through Sterling's questions like steel through paper. Because Sergeant Coleman and Atlas needed space to recover without becoming curiosity items or case studies. Because sometimes the best thing the military can do for its people is let them heal quietly. He turned to Coleman directly. Sergeant, I apologize that your cover was compromised. The intent was to provide you protection through anonymity. Coleman found her voice, rough but steady. Not your fault, sir. Structural failure and bad luck. Sometimes luck is just timing, Crawford gestured at the assembled personnel. But perhaps this outcome is better. No more hiding, no more questions, just truth and the respect you've earned. Webb approached slowly, tablet lowered, professional skepticism replaced by something approaching humility. Sergeant Coleman, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies. I doubted your capabilities, questioned your credentials, recommended additional scrutiny when I should have recognized expertise beyond my understanding. You were doing your job, Mr. Webb. I was being arrogant. There's a difference. Webb extended his hand. Coleman shook it briefly. Thank you for your service. Both of you. Harper came next, his earlier aggression and dismissiveness completely absent. Sergeant, His voice broke, started again. I called you names. Questioned your competence, made assumptions based on nothing except my own prejudice. I'm sorry, completely sorry. Sergeant Harper, you trained Atlas for 6 weeks under impossible conditions. You didn't have the information you needed to succeed. That's not failure, that's just circumstances. But you succeeded in 90 seconds. Because Atlas already knew me, already trusted me. That's not superior skill, that's prior relationship. Coleman's voice held gentle correction. You're a good trainer, Sergeant. Atlas just needed someone specific. That doesn't diminish your capabilities. The generosity of the response seemed to hit Harper harder than accusation would have. He nodded, unable to speak further, and stepped back. Anderson approached with care, her earlier recognition confirmed. I was there, Sergeant, Kandahar, 2019. I worked logistics support when they brought you in. Both of you critical. Both not expected to survive. Her voice wavered. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you found each other again. Thank you, specialist. Brooks moved forward, no longer voice of reason because reason seemed inadequate for circumstances. Sergeant Coleman, I've worked with military working dog teams for 8 years. I've never seen a bond like yours and Atlas's. Never seen that level of coordination. Now I understand why. She paused. Though, what you both survived, what you lost, I can't imagine, but I'm honored to have witnessed your reunion. The words felt insufficient but sincere. Coleman accepted them with a nod. Sterling stood apart, processing information that had demolished her professional assessments and personal assumptions. Finally, she approached with movements that suggested each step cost effort. Sergeant Coleman. The formality felt different now, respectful rather than dismissive. I've spent 2 weeks questioning your legitimacy, doubting your capabilities, recommending scrutiny that you didn't deserve. I was wrong, comprehensively wrong, and I apologize. Ma'am, you are protecting the program's integrity. That's your role. My role should include recognizing competence regardless of its source. Sterling's jaw tightened. I allowed bias against your size, your gender, your apparent background to override evidence. That's unprofessional, unacceptable. She extended her hand. I'd like to learn from you, if you're willing to teach someone who failed to recognize a warrior standing in front of her. Coleman shook Sterling's hand, feeling the genuine contrition in the grip. We all see what we're trained to see, ma'am. Sometimes reality requires different training. The truth is out now. The consequences are rolling. But Ivy Coleman's story doesn't end here. At the end of this video, a phone call will arrive that changes everything again. A mission, a choice, a door opening to something bigger. Subscribe and hit the bell, because this is only the beginning. The next chapter is already waiting, and you'll want to be there when it drops. The immediate aftermath of Revelation involved logistics. Medical check for Coleman despite her protests, equipment return and documentation, debriefing with Crawford about operational security and information control. Atlas remained at Coleman's side throughout, his protective stance gradually relaxing as threat assessment concluded no danger existed in current environment. By 1700 hours, most personnel had dispersed, returning to duties or quarters with stories that would spread through base with viral efficiency. Coleman knew that by morning, everyone at Fort Bragg would know her real identity, her real background, the real reason Atlas had bonded with her so completely. Privacy was gone, anonymity was finished, but perhaps Crawford was right, perhaps truth was better than hiding. Reynolds found her near the kennels, watching Atlas drink from his water bowl with the intensity of a dog who'd recently experienced high stress. Sergeant Coleman, Reynolds said, using the correct rank naturally. A word? Yes, sir. I spoke with Colonel Crawford. He's authorized me to offer you a position. Reynolds pulled out a folder, thicker than the previous assignment documentation. Training position. You'd develop and teach advanced canine handler courses, specializing in trauma recovery and operational coordination. Atlas would assist with demonstrations and therapy work with other dogs recovering from deployment stress. Coleman took the folder, but didn't open it immediately. Training position means staying. Staying means being visible, yes. But visibility also means legitimacy, protection through official status rather than classified shadows. Reynolds paused. You've spent 2 years recovering quietly. Maybe it's time to recover loudly. Show other warriors that survival doesn't mean the end of service. The logic carried weight. Coleman had spent 24 months hiding from attention, from questions, from anything that might force her to confront the totality of what she'd lost. But hiding hadn't healed anything, had only delayed the inevitable confrontation with past and present. I'll consider it, sir. That's all I ask, Reynolds gestured at Atlas. He's working again, really working. Not just performing, but engaging with purpose. You did that. You brought him back. Now you can help bring others back. After Reynolds left, Foster appeared, timing suggesting he had been waiting for private conversation. Sergeant Coleman, Foster said, his earlier curiosity replaced by straightforward respect. I won't pretend I understand what you went through. I deployed with dogs, but not in classified operations. Not with units where casualties ran that high. He paused. But I've seen what happens to handlers who lose their partners. Most never work with dogs again. Can't handle the emotional risk. The fact that you came back, that you fought to reunite with Atlas, That says something important. Says I couldn't leave him behind, Coleman replied quietly. Says you're exactly the kind of person who should be teaching the next generation of handlers, the ones who will deploy into situations where bonds mean survival. Foster's expression was serious. Think about Reynolds's offer. We need people like you, people who understand that these aren't just tools. They're partners, warriors, family. Transitioning from military to civilian life required specialized knowledge. Educational programs designed specifically for veterans, teaching skills that translated combat leadership into corporate management, legal services that understood military law, VA benefits, disability claims, and the complex paperwork that could make or break a veteran's future. Online certification programs in cybersecurity, project management, technical fields where military experience counted as qualification. Legal advocates who fought for benefits, who understood PTSD claims, who navigated the bureaucracy that often defeated those it was meant to serve. Education and legal support built specifically for warriors coming home. 2 weeks passed with different rhythm than before. Coleman was recognized now, not as curiosity, but as legitimate presence with documented capabilities. Personnel greeted her with respect rather than confusion. Training sessions drew observers who wanted to learn rather than judge. Atlas moved through base with visible relaxation, his defensive posture softening as environment proved consistently safe. Harper transformed most dramatically. He requested formal mentorship from Coleman, approaching each session with humility that contrasted sharply with his earlier arrogance. She taught him about reading dogs' micro-expressions, about understanding that refusal sometimes meant protection rather than defiance, about building trust through consistency rather than dominance. Sterling implemented policy changes. Handlers with undocumented backgrounds would receive accommodation rather than immediate scrutiny. Trauma indicators in dogs would trigger therapeutic support rather than removal proceedings. Operational experience would be valued regardless of official documentation. Connor James wrote a research paper on elite canine bonds, citing Coleman and Atlas as primary case study with permission. Willow Hayes began rehabilitation work with 3 retired military working dogs, applying techniques she'd observed from Coleman's approach. The canine program evolved, informed by experience that transcended standard protocols. But Coleman felt restless. The training position was meaningful, important, necessary. Yet something inside her recognized that teaching represented ending. The final transition from operator to instructor, from active service to institutional memory. She wasn't ready for endings. Neither was Atlas. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the revelation. Coleman was in her quarters, reviewing training curriculum for the advanced handler course scheduled to begin next month, when her phone displayed a number she didn't recognize, but a domain suffix she did: .mil, military, official, potentially classified. Sergeant Coleman, she answered, tension immediate in her voice. Sergeant, this is Colonel Crawford. Secure line. Do you have privacy? Yes, sir. Coleman moved to close her door, ensure no one could overhear. I have a situation that requires your unique capabilities, both yours and Atlas's. Crawford's tone carried weight. We've located 4 more ghost dogs. 3 handlers confirmed killed in action in separate incidents over the past 18 months. The dogs are alive, currently held at a classified facility, but they're not responding to anyone. Won't work, won't engage, acting similar to how Atlas presented before you arrived. Coleman's pulse quickened. You need someone who speaks their language. I need someone they'll trust, someone who understands what they've survived, someone who can unlock them the way you unlocked Atlas. Crawford paused. This is voluntary. You're under no obligation. You have a good position at Bragg, meaningful work, stability. I'm not ordering you to take this mission. What's the mission objective, sir? Recovery and rehabilitation. Determine which dogs can return to operational status, which need therapeutic retirement, which capabilities can be salvaged from a program that officially never existed. Another pause. The dogs deserve better than being warehoused because nobody knows how to reach them. Their handlers died protecting classified assets. This is how we honor that service, by ensuring their partners aren't abandoned. Coleman looked at Atlas, who'd lifted his head at the change in her voice tone, amber eyes watching with that uncanny awareness that suggested he understood more than biology should allow. Where and when, sir? Classified location. Transportation arranged. Wheels up in 48 hours. Crawford's voice carried something that might have been approval or might have been relief. Pack light, this isn't deployment, but bring your experience. That's what matters. Yes, sir. Coleman, one more thing. Crawford's tone shifted slightly. These dogs, they're survivors, like you, like Atlas. They've seen teammates die. They've lost handlers they'd have died for. They're carrying trauma that most people can't comprehend. Pause. You're one of the only people who can reach them, who can understand what they need. This mission matters more than you know. I understand, sir. Good. I'll send coordinates and logistics within 12 hours. Travel safe, Sergeant. The line went dead. Coleman sat in the silence of her quarters, phone still in hand, Atlas now sitting beside her chair with his head resting on her knee. She ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the familiar texture, the solid warmth, the reality of partnership that had survived, things partnerships weren't supposed to survive. 4 more ghost dogs, 3 dead handlers, warriors without their people, partners without their partners. She knew what that felt like, knew the hollow emptiness of survival when everyone else died, knew the guilt that whispered you should have died too, should have been with them, should have protected them better. She'd survived it. Atlas had survived it. Together they'd found purpose in the pieces. Maybe they could help others do the same. Coleman stood, moved to her closet, pulled out the duffel that had been packed and ready since the day she'd arrived at Fort Bragg. Always prepared, always ready. Some habits from deployment never faded. She began checking equipment with automatic precision. Medical kit, tactical gear, documentation, personal items. Not full deployment load, but enough for whatever came next. Atlas watched, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert. He recognized preparation, recognized the signs of movement and mission. His tail moved once, twice, not excitement, anticipation. A knock at the door interrupted her packing. Coleman opened it to find Reynolds, Foster, and Harper standing in the hallway. All 3 wore expressions suggesting they knew something had changed. "Sergeant Coleman," Reynolds said, "Colonel Crawford contacted me 15 minutes ago, informed me you will be temporarily detached for a recovery operation." "Yes, sir." "He also informed me that this operation relates to the Ghost Dog program, other survivors who need your specific expertise." Reynolds studied her face. "This is what you do, isn't it? You bring broken warriors back from the edge." "I try, sir." "Good." Reynolds extended his hand. Coleman shook it firmly. "You have our support. Whatever you need, resources, equipment, backup, you ask and we provide." Foster stepped forward next. "Sergeant, bring them home, all of them, the dogs and whoever's left of the program. Show them that survival doesn't mean the end. It means the beginning of something different." Harper was last. "I learned more from you in 3 weeks than I learned in 10 years of training, Sergeant Coleman. Whatever you accomplish on this mission, know that you've already changed things here. Changed how we see handlers, how we see dogs, how we understand the bonds that matter most." Coleman felt emotion tightening her throat but maintained control. "Thank you, all of you, for the support, for the understanding, for recognizing that Atlas and I needed space to heal." "You healed by working," Foster observed, "by having purpose. That's the lesson we needed to learn." After they left, Coleman finished packing, organized her quarters for extended absence, made sure all documentation was filed and accessible for whoever would cover her training responsibilities during her detachment. At 2300 hours, she lay in bed with Atlas on the floor beside her, his breathing steady and rhythmic. Sleep wouldn't come easily, anticipation and mission planning already running through her mind in endless loops. 4 ghost dogs, each one a warrior, each one carrying trauma and loss and the weight of survival without their handlers, each one waiting for someone who understood, someone who could speak their language, someone who had walked the same path through fire and somehow kept walking. Coleman reached down, let her hand rest on Atlas's shoulder. He shifted slightly, pressing against her touch, maintaining contact even in rest. "Looks like we're not done yet, boy," she whispered into the darkness. "Time to bring our family home." Atlas's ear twitched. Acknowledgement. Agreement. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The way they'd faced everything since August 12th, 2019, 0347 hours, when the world had exploded and somehow they'd survived the blast. They'd survived because they had each other, because bonds forged in fire didn't break easily, Because warriors understood that service didn't end with trauma. It evolved, adapted, found new forms. The ghost dogs were waiting, broken but not destroyed, lost but not abandoned. Coleman and Atlas would find them, would reach them, would show them that survival could mean more than just breathing. It could mean living, working, serving again in ways that honored those who hadn't survived. The mission mattered. The warriors mattered. And for the first time since Kandahar, Coleman felt something that resembled hope spreading through her chest, like warmth after hypothermia. They weren't done yet. They were just beginning.